Hi guys, um, welcome. We are doing another episode of our interview, and this time round with our senior pastor, Reverend Arnold Orono, and he will be explaining and taking us through a journey with Hekima. Remember, we are discussing Hekima at 21 years.
My name is Arnold Orono, and I'm the pastor at Hekima Center. I just want to introduce myself a bit. By training, I am an engineer. In campus, I did electrical and communications engineering. Later on in life, I also did a master's degree in leadership. So I graduated about 2 or 3 years ago. That's where I graduated with my master's degree in leadership. I am aspiring to do a PhD, but right now one of my goals is really to get something in the area of theology, or something that has a theological foundation, just because of the career path that I have chosen. I am married to one wife, Christine. We have 2 daughters. One of them is called Amy, the other is called Ruby. I'm passionate about farming. I'm discovering, I think that passion has always been there, and I'm unpacking that, I'm discovering that. I'm passionate about issues of leadership, issues of personal development. I'm passionate about that as well. I think those are 2 things that I would say at this stage I'm passionate about. I'm trying to think about other things I'm passionate about. I'm passionate about ideas. I love ideas, I love concepts. I love what you'd call game-changing ideas. Not the normal idea, but ideas that just sort of out of the box, creative ideas, something that goes beyond the norm. I'm passionate about seeing people excel. I get so happy when I see people doing well. I get so happy when I see people excelling in the area of calling, in the area of assignment, in their gifting. Hekima, as Hekima, was born in July of 1999. But before then, we existed as a different ministry. But that ministry landed in trouble. It found itself in some trouble. I was explaining earlier and just sharing about how when we found out some things were wrong, I will not get into the details of what was wrong, because that is not the objective. But we found out that some things were wrong, and we wanted to correct those things. The path that I wanted to pursue to correct those things was not a path that was preferred by the leadership at that time. And eventually I found myself between a rock and a hard place, because some of the things that had been wrong were actually in the public domain. Somebody was sending me, somebody sent me a text and asked me, go and check on so and so and find out what happened. And that's when we discovered that what we thought had ended was actually continuing, and those issues needed to be addressed. So I felt like as a leader I needed to take responsibility, which I did, without naming names, without trying to throw stones or aspersions at people. But eventually it just sent us into a season of where we're just tossed to and fro. We're just like in the waves. A lot of people left church at that time. A lot of people that we felt close to, they left church, some of them without even saying where they were going. It was a really painful period. It was one of the few times, I think that was the only time in my life that I've had to take Piritons to sleep. There's this joke that if you're having a child who is having a problem sleeping, give them some Piritons to help them along with sleeping. Well, I needed to give myself some Piritons to help me along with sleeping. And that was one of the most difficult moments of my life. But I just want to acknowledge the faithfulness of God, that God has seen me through, has seen us through as a ministry. We are not where I would have wanted us to be, but at the end of the day, you're not the one who chooses where you're going, how you're going. You have a part to play in this, in terms of submitting to God. But there's another part of this that has to do with God, and God himself just defining your path and defining your journey. At the time when things went wrong, I used to feel that the problems we were facing as a ministry were on the outside. But I later realized that one of the things that God was doing was God was dealing first of all with the external problems and the external challenges that we had as a ministry before he began to deal with the internal challenges. I discovered that I was very mature. I discovered I had a lot of inner issues that needed sorting out, insecurities that needed to be addressed. All these things that, sometimes there are parts of you that are buried because the bigger problem is an external problem. Maybe the bigger problem is an abusive father. Maybe the bigger problem is a mother who is not there, or a mother who has issues. So it is easier to focus on the bigger problem than to focus on you. But when the bigger problem was removed, that's when you begin to discover that even you need to do some work. And so over the years, I believe that God has been working. When I look at myself now, when I look at myself about 20 years ago, I see huge differences. I see a lot of change. I still see areas that God needs to work. I don't think we will get there before Jesus comes. But I also see a lot of differences. I see what God has been doing and what God has been developing over the years. And I realize more more so now than ever before, the need for us to just learn how to submit to the process of God and submit to the hand of God and submit to what God is doing. Sometimes we want to defend our positions, we want to defend who we are, but I realize that it is really important to just understand what God is doing and submit to that process. It makes things a lot easier. So that's how Hekima was born. At that time, we called ourselves Vineyard Christian Fellowship. Even now, sometimes when you go and check our bank account, they still recognize us as Vineyard and not as Hekima, although we made a formal change. Around 2003 or 2004, that's when Hekima was registered formally. So we have that registration certificate recognized by the government of Kenya. This was around the time I always associated with the era when Kibaki came to power, because before then it was so difficult to get ministry registration. But somehow those early days when Kibaki came to power, it's like the door opened, and for a window it was easy to register as a society, and that's when our registration came through. So that has been our journey. We've been meeting at various places. I know at one time we were meeting in Methodist. One time we've been just meeting in various places. But right now we seem to be settled at National House, and that's where we've been for the last, I think, 10 plus years. Even the journey to get to National House was really, really interesting. I feel like God has always sort of pushed us into a corner, and every time we're pushed into a corner, He tells us you need to make some radical decisions. And when you make those radical decisions, we find that that was actually the will of God for us. There was a time when our Sunday services were in Methodist guest house, and our midweek meetings and the office were in National House. And we had the resources to support both. And part of the reason why that happened was because the landlord really did not want us to use National House as a place for meeting as a church. But over time, I think he had a certain concept about church, which over time we've helped to disprove. I think he felt like churches take advantage of people. He felt like church leaders were not faithful. They felt like they're not people of integrity. And when we came in, we wanted to demonstrate that, look, that is not who we are. That we are a people of integrity. What we say is what we'll do. And over the years, he's really come to observe that slogan that we have, a people of internal change and a people of influence. He actually says he can see that. He can see that internal change. That we actually do what we say and say what we do. Is that the right word? Something like that. So that has been our journey, and that's how we found ourselves at National House.
So, Pasi, could you share with us some of the lowest moments you've had, highest moments you've had? What are some of those memorable moments? Just share with us. We want to know more about it.
There are many highs, there are many lows. Sometimes I think the lows are more visible than the highs, because the lows are what you remember. They make a significant dent in your life. But let me just give you some of the lows that we went through. One of the lows that I went through was that time when we transitioned and we had to, I was telling you about the story of having to take Piriton, because I was struggling to sleep. I remember that season I was struggling to sleep. Would get to bed at night and I'd just toss and turn. And after about 2 weeks, I said, we can't stay here. I needed to do something to help me to facilitate the sleep. And that's when I started taking Piriton. I think I did that for 1 or 2 nights, and after that I adapted to a new rhythm. But that was one of the low points, because is this the will of God? Those questions begin to come into your mind. Is this the will of God? God, is this what you wanted? It was such a mess. And the last thing you want to be involved in is a mess. Sometimes as believers, we are so focused on our name, and name is important. The Bible says a good name is a very important thing. But there's sometimes when God just has to break that mentality that you'll always have a good name. And sometimes when God sort of takes your name through the dirt, eventually he'll clean it up, but he takes it through the dirt so that you don't idolize your name, and you make sure that your focus is right. Your focus is not on the name, your focus is on God. So that was one of our low points. After that, a lot of people began to leave church. We ran into dilemmas financially. We had to make a decision to leave our location. And I can't remember how much we were paying, but we were paying quite a chunk to maintain ourselves in that location. At that time, we also, when the ministry was handed over to me, there was a debt situation. I think it was somewhere between 2 to 4 million. I think Bernard can give us the exact figures. Just all sorts of debts, It was a really, really, really challenging time. I also gave the story how around that season, the facility that we were using for children's church was really broken down, run down, ramshackle. The benches were cracked and torn. And this person comes to me and tells me, accuses me of not not having the interest of children at heart. And I thought, I wish you would understand where I am, because we have this debt of our head. We're struggling to pay. People are leaving church. People are sending all sorts of accusations. I've found this like this. I don't even have time to make my imprint on the ministry. And here you come, and instead of trying to sort of come up with an answer, that season ended. But really, it was really, really an interesting season. From there, we journeyed. We went to a school. I believe that school was like a place of sheltering for about a year or so. And we had a good time there, because the school at least provided a facility for the children's church. The children's church had an opportunity to stabilize. The main church stabilized. It was a bit out of town, so the church reduced by almost 80%. I think we just dropped, I think if my faith was in numbers, I would have told God, I'm not called to this. Before I came to Nairobi, I was pastoring a church in Nakuru, and for a season, we had been doing really well. The numbers just kept going through the roof. We came to a bump in the road. We had to slow down a bit. But as I was coming to Nairobi, we were preparing for another round of growth. And that is when I was called to come to Nairobi. So my mentality was always that of rapid growth. This thing can do well if you get things in place. And Nairobi was a totally different story. It's like you're going round the mountain, and round the mountain, and round the mountain. And I think that brought a lot of discouragement with it. You begin to wonder whether you're called to this thing or other people are called. I think there came a time when I concluded that maybe this is not my calling. I think God just uses that to clean you up and to deal with some things. And I'm not speaking from a place of perfection, but I can see what the Lord has done over the last few years, and I can tell you He's done a tremendous work. So that season was a difficult season for us. After that season, I think about 3-4 years later, we went through another season of shaking. I think for about 1 or 2 years, when different sets of people were leaving church. One set of people left. And again, the challenge with many of these things was it looked like these people had discussed this, so that people leave church together, a group leaves church together at the same time. It looks like these guys had discussed and made up their minds and left. Then after another 1 or 2 years, again, another group came together. It's like the same thing, discussed, made up their minds and left. And you get so tired because it looks like you're the one in the wrong. You ask God, what have we done? You ask all those questions. But I discovered that when God has called you to ministry, one of the things that you need to deal with is rejection. You need to come to a place where your heart is stronger than what people say about you. If you don't get to that place, my God, you will suffer. And when I look at a lot of ministers that have gone before me, I see that problem. I see people who are rejected and never really overcame that rejection. And I can understand where they are. I can understand what they've gone through, because I've gone through a similar journey. And I can't say that I'm out, but God has been helping. And God has been helping us along that journey, and just helping us deal with those issues. And if this is the path that you want to follow, then you need to be ready for rejection. I think it is everybody. I think it's business, whatever area you've been called, but especially ministry. You need to be ready to deal with rejection. I think God uses that sometimes to deal with this desire to please people often. Because many of us are born with that desire inside of us to please people often. And God just uses that to deal with that desire and to bring you to a place where you make a choice. Am I going to focus on God, or am I going to focus on people? And I think that is a place I had to come to, where I had to make that choice whether I'm going to focus on God or focus on people. During this journey, there have also been high points. One of the high points was, I remember when we moved to Methodist, the school we were paying rent in before, we were paying about 10,000 per month. Then we came to a place where we had to shift because the neighbors were unhappy with the noise that we were making. And we looked for a place and right up to the week before we had to shift, we didn't find a place. So we tried to talk to the school administration and asked them, can you give us an extra month here so that we can find a place? And they refused completely refused. So that last week we've left our old place. We have no idea where we're going. I mean, you talk about Abraham going to a place he does not know. That's where we were. We've left this place. I have no idea where we're going. We've just told the people that, look, if we find a place, we'll move there and we'll communicate. And in the middle of that week, we went to Methodist guest house, and Methodist says, yes, we'll accept you, come. But the only challenge was the rent was 5 times what we were paying before. I think before we were paying 10,000 a month. Here in Methodist, we were paying about 50 to 60,000, depending on whether the Sundays were 5 Sundays or 4 Sundays. I think there was also the issue of equipment that had to be sorted out in Methodist. So by the time we were through, I was just wondering, God, how are we going to deal with this? But I told myself, and I told God, as long as you give us the platform, we will keep doing what we're doing. The day you don't pay the bills for this thing, then that is it. We just close up shop and we get back to doing other things. Around that season, I think a few years before, I had opportunities to work with places like the United Nations. I was told that my colleagues, because I was in IT, that was my degree, electrical and communications, I was told that my colleagues were getting salaries of £10,000 in the UK. So those opportunities are running at the back of your head, and you're thinking, serve God or just go and take advantage of this opportunity and just sort out finances for the rest of your life. So God helped us, and somebody came 1 or 2 Sundays after we had moved into Methodist and told us, how much are you paying for this place? And as he looked around, I can actually, as I'm giving you this story, I can see him. Eventually passed on, but I can see him how he came and leant on the pulpit and just asked me casually, and I told him. Then he told me, "You do this. Send Bernard tomorrow to collect a check." Bernard was with us at that time. The faithful Bernard has been with me for a long time. And Bernard went and came back. We had no idea what the check was. That check covered that month. The following month, he said, "Send Bernard for a check." What happened, I eventually discovered that what happened with this man was, this man had been born again for a while, and he had been trusting God to be filled with the Holy Spirit with the evidence of speaking tongues. And he had gone to different places, and none of those places they'd been laid hands on, prayed for, he had never spoken in tongues. Then one day he came to church at one of our former places, and as we were worshiping, in the middle of worship, he began to speak in tongues. And that's what caused him to identify with the ministry. Can you imagine a miracle is taking place and no one is conscious of that miracle? It's sort of like the story of Esther, where, is it not Haman, but Mordecai sounds out the king that somebody is out to kill him, and the king does not get his, and Mordecai does not get his reward then. But many years later, or many months later, when Mordecai needs the reward, that's when God gives him. So I didn't know this story until this man came, and even after this man came, I didn't understand why he identified with us. He gave us his car for my sister-in-law's wedding. He became, for that season, he really supported us. And eventually he told me that, by the way, I came to church and I connected with you guys because when I came to church, I'd been trusting God to pray in tongues, never prayed in tongues. And during worship one day, I began praying in tongues. And that for me was one of the high points. I said, wow, God, if you did it for him, God, this is your faithfulness. After 6 months, he was not able to maintain that. I think he also entered into some financial problems. But by then, I think we had developed our muscle and we were able to carry it from then on. I remember during that season, we were paying people, I think, a salary of about $1,000 per month. We were telling them, we'll pay your bus fare. If you're staying on your own, we'll pay your accommodation, your rent, but we'll also give you just $1,000 to help you because we didn't have the money to support them. And imagine people stayed. I don't even know, when I look back, I don't even know how we made it through that season. But somehow, by the grace of God, we made it through that season. And then eventually, I think from then, we found our way to National House. We've been at National House for a number of years. Again, ups and downs. At one time, like I said, we were in Methodist and National House. Then one of our major sponsors just passed on. And around the time he passed on, we noticed also a decrease in our income. And we asked God what to do. And God just gave us the wisdom. Move everything to National House. And we moved everything to National House. And that is where we've been till today. Another high-low point was when we acquired land. I gave the story earlier, how somebody calls me and asks for a bank account. I send them a bank account. And this must have been around 2010 or so, 2009, 2010, 2011, somewhere around there. And at that time, when we were thinking of land, we began this project for land, but we didn't think we had the muscle to buy land. So we said, let's just look at leasing land so that we can relocate, set up a tent, and begin to build from there. So he gives me a call, and I send him the bank account, and then I check later, and I see 1.4 million in the account. I mean, that was the single largest offering we had gotten in, I think at that time, ever. Woo! I felt like going for a party. I couldn't believe it. And then my mind shifted from leasing land to buying land. That was the message I had very clearly. God was saying, don't lease land, buy land. So a few years later, I think around 2013, 2014, we actually bought land. And that land landed us in trouble. There was this huge power cable moving through the property, which initially we thought was a small cable. We thought that this was a cable supplying power to the neighbors, until we heard that it supplies power to Limuru. When we asked for a quote on how to move that cable, the cable moving was 7 million. If you came as an organization, that was multiplied. It was half the cost of the land. And we thought, wow, what kind of mess is this that we found ourselves in? Sometimes, as a believer, sometimes you don't use 4-letter words. But during seasons like that, it will be very easy to use 4-letter words. You're asking God, keep me, because you've just found yourself in this huge mess. The neighbors didn't want us there. We tried to negotiate with them. They put all sorts of stumbling blocks. At the same time as we're doing this, we've taken a loan because we had just enough to pay a deposit, and we took a loan to top up. We've taken a loan. That loan is eating into our reserves. I remember it ate into our reserves until we had actually paid everything. And we had gotten to a point where the ministry could not afford it, and I had to sit down with my wife and say, hey, we're going to have to foot this next bill. I think it's about 200,000. We're going to have to foot it ourselves. At that time, there's tension everywhere. There's tension in church. There's tension at home. There's just tension everywhere. Because nobody, when you're in money trouble, nobody wants to talk to you. People want to talk to you when things are well. When things are bad, nobody wants to see you. But I remember during that season, God challenging me to just lift up my faith and trust Him. And I used to take about 3 days every month to just go out and pray at a place called Shunem. And I went there, and God just told me, release your faith. Stop looking to people. Release your faith for this. So I began doing that. I began releasing my faith for that. Really. And it didn't take long, about 2-3 months or so. Somebody came, said he's interested in the property. At that time, we had other people who were interested. And we thought, they came, they looked like they're going to take the property. Then somewhere along the line, they changed their minds. So we were not too excited about this guy. But one of the things that happened was when he came to see the property, he happened to meet one of Nelson's lawyers, one of Ashtiva's lawyers. And actually, if he had met us, we'd have told him 15 million for that land. But because he met one of Ashtiva's lawyer told him double that, twice that. And we had told the agents dealing with the property that we expect a certain amount, the rest is yours. So that's the figure he went with. And he came back. And when he came back, we sat down together. He asked us details. We gave him the title deed. He went and did his own due diligence. Came back. He said he's interested. So he told him, look, the first thing we'd want you to do is just offset the loan. And once you've offset the loan, these are the stories we'll talk. Within that week, he had offset that loan. I mean, a loan of about 9-point-something million. Whoa. It was like just something off our shoulders. Again, that was another point where you just want to go and do a party. You want to go and dance because it was such a powerful testimony for me. Eventually paid off everything. The resources that he gave us allowed us to invest. Some of you know Wing B. In the building, we acquired Wing B. We set it up for our children. The resources that he gave us allowed us to acquire land. We acquired about 1 acre in Lukenya. The resources that he gave us allowed us to acquire about 3 acres of land in Bukura, where we planted trees. I believe this is the second year or so with trees, and we are doing all sorts of experiments. We did this as a group. The resources he gave us allowed us to build reserves. I mean, just from those resources, it was like he just gave us a breakthrough, a complete breakthrough. But the journey to that resource was really, really something else. So I just want to say that there have been highs, there have been lows, there have been challenges, but every time we've overcome a mountain or we've gone through that hurdle, a breakthrough comes. A door just unlocks, a door just unfolds. Another breakthrough time for me was when we began our daily meetings, which I didn't believe we could do. I didn't believe we could run daily meetings. But I remember the first set of meetings, I sat down and talked to Pastor Mao and told him, I feel we need to do worship for 40 days. Because at that time, a prophet had come, and the prophet was sensing that there was some spiritual warfare around the place. And he said, if you can do this for 40 days, I felt God saying, if you can worship for 40 days, something will break. So I told Pastor Mao, we need to do that. And I didn't even know whether we had the muscle to do it. We did it for 40 days. 40 days became 1 year. 1 year became 2 years. Recently, I think it's almost 3 years or so that we've been meeting from Monday to Friday, almost consistently, except for 1 or 2 days in between. And it's been such an amazing time. I mean, it has had its challenges. I agree it has had its challenges. But it has allowed us to encounter the prophetic at a whole new level. It has given us understanding of the spiritual realm. It has given us understanding of the dynamics of prayer, things that we didn't understand before. And this journey, if we had not gone through that season, this journey would not have had. One of the prophecies that we've always had, or we've always received, is we have been called a missionary church. I remember that prophecy came in 1999, and I used to ask myself, what is a missionary church? What does this mean? And the guy who gave us the prophecy wanted to come and release us into that area of calling. But when I listened to him, somehow I didn't key into his frequencies. And I'm glad maybe I didn't, because I think sometimes in the prophetic word, there is an evangelistic way of looking at the prophetic word. You think, just pray and it will happen. We forget that sometimes there's a journey towards the fulfilling of that prophetic word. Some prophecies, by the way, we received in 1997, we began seeing coming to fruition in 2010, because it took us time to mature to a place where that word was able to come to pass. But I believe that this 3-year window where we've been meeting almost on a daily basis, it has allowed us to develop our own people. I believe it has even prepared us for such a time as this. Because if we had not done those 40 days and those 1 year, those 2 years, those 3 years, I think this season would have got us really flat-footed. But because God had been preparing us and stretching us and developing our muscle, when this season of Corona came, by the time this season came, our minds were already shifting, we were already making the transition. It was so easy to shift from one thing to another. And that's why we are where we are today.
So, where do you see Hekima in the next 5, 6, 10, 10 years to come? Where are we going as a ministry?
What does the future look like? The future looks bright from my perspective, from where I sit. God began to speak to us towards the end of last year into this year about a horse anointing. God gave me another metaphor for that horse when he showed me. I had a dream when I was riding a motorbike, and I feel like that horse, that motorbike represents that horse. That this is a season where things are beginning to happen at supernatural speed. I remember the dream somebody had about a surge. This is a season where God is giving us a surge. You know, that word surge, when the person gave that dream, that word surge was not a very common word that we would hear. But recently I began to hear that word with respect to Corona. You know, a surge in numbers, a surge in infections, a surge in deaths. You know, that word surge has become commonplace, but it became commonplace for the negative. God spoke to us about a surge, and this surge was a positive surge. And that's what we're preparing for. A surge that will give us greater influence over this city, greater influence over this nation, and greater influence over the nations. And I believe that media is key. You know, what we're doing in terms of getting online, I believe that that is key to this surge. So we just trust God again that what he has begun to do, he will be faithful to accomplish.
And finally, Pasi, what do you tell that upcoming pastor, someone who has a dream of becoming a pastor, someone who feels the call of becoming a pastor? What can you tell them?
My final words for the person out there who wants to join ministry is, one, you need to be sure that God has called you. Be very clear that God has called you. Every one of us is called to ministry, but there are certain aspects of this call that you need to be assured that this is the will of God. One aspect of this call has to do with what you'd call full-time ministry. Be sure that God has called you to full-time. I believe that in this season, more than ever, God is unlocking the different gifts and talents that we have. One of the things we've been discussing with Christine has been how this season is what you call the season of the talent economy. It's the season of the gig economy, but it's also the season of the talent economy, where our talents are now being brought to the fore. So things that were hidden, things that were buried, are now coming to the fore, coming to the forefront. And these are things that we need to exercise in this season. So you might have a talent in communication, you might have a talent in preaching. I don't think it's a preaching talent, but let's call it a calling in preaching. But you also have other talents. We should be able to list at least 5 talents that you have. And these 5 talents will be able to give us an idea of areas that you can invest in. I know I have a communication talent, just by virtue of what I'm doing. I have a talent in analysis, I analyze. I have an admin talent. I have a strategic talent. I think I'm very strategic. I realize that. People tell me that you don't think like everybody else. There's an element of strategy. And I believe creativity. So everything that you find me doing sort of revolves around that. You know, where are we going? What is the outcome? What are we thinking? And then the administrative aspect, to be able to, if not to anchor it, to be able to find people who will be able to work alongside me and help me anchor this. And that helps me identify the areas, the spaces that I'm supposed to occupy. I find that when I get into macro, I think it's micro managing, I get very bogged down with that. But I like that place of big picture, just strategy, seeing where we're going, keeping your eye on where we're going and what God desires to do. And that reflects what I do. The same thing with you. If you want to jump into ministry, then you need to begin to think in terms of what are my talents, so that over and above communication, what else can I do? I remember this young man coming to see me once, and he told me he wanted to preach. And when I look at this guy, it's just that, you know, sometimes that pastoral thing covers you. But I felt like telling him off. I felt he thought so highly of himself, you know. I'm glad you don't know him, who I'm talking about here. He thought so highly of himself. And I'm looking at him, I'm thinking, you're not consistent, you're not faithful, and you've come here and the first thing you want me to do is give you a platform. You know, when I look at your life, I don't see, you know, so I just kept quiet. He kept coming back to tell me, and I think he was trying to send a hint that if I don't give him that platform, he would leave church. I think eventually he left church, and he left for a while. Then he came back, and when he came back, he was not the same young man he was before. It was life had taken a nosedive. And I thought when he came back, I didn't want to have this kind of discussion with him. I said, let's just watch him a bit. Came back, hung around a bit, and then again disappeared. the point I'm trying to drive is that ministry is not just about preaching. Ministry is about many other things, about administration. It's about getting your hands dirty. I feel like if you're not ready to get your hands dirty, then you're not ready to preach. There's some times in your ministry where God calls you not to minister on the pulpit, but to do a lot of back office, non-pulpit work behind the scenes that no one can see, and no one will know what you're doing. But many of us want to be there where we're seen, where our story is heard, where people are always listening to what we have to say. But before you get there, there's a lot of back office work that you need to do. In fact, from my perspective, one of the things that, and this helps to keep you humble, when it comes to lifting things, carrying things, get involved. Why? It just helps you to keep your heart humble. I need to drive so and so from point A to point B. There's no problem. Just do it. It just helps you to keep your heart humble. And I think that that's what true ministry is all about. True ministry is about a servant heart, a heart to serve. Whatever capacity or opportunity you have to serve, I will serve. And when you have that kind of attitude, or you can have that kind of heart, then it's just a matter of time before God begins to give you a platform of your own. The Bible says, faithful in little will make you ruler over much. So I'm trying to say that if you feel your call to ministry, please don't let it not be your number one thing to preach on the pulpit. Humble yourself. What other talents do you have? Unpack those other talents. Try and do both at the same time. Try and work in ministry and develop your farming gift, or work in ministry and develop your other gift. Because sometimes ministry does not pay like other occupations outside there. I remember one man of God telling me that leadership is not about money. Leadership is really about influence. If the minute money begins to find its way to leadership, then that leadership is very easy for that leadership to be corrupted. Part of the problem with ministry has been people found their way there, and because he was not able to meet their needs, they became manipulative. And that's why I encourage you, try and find something else to do. Try and find something else to support what you're doing. Don't just jump into ministry because you have a passion for preaching and you think that that is everything that there is to do about ministry. I'll wind up with this story of this young lady who came to see me and had such a wonderful gift. She still has that wonderful gift. And she was telling me again, she had the opportunity to go to campus, but she wanted to do ministry. And I told her, I think a good idea would be for you to go to campus. And then after you've left campus, come back and do ministry. At least you'll do ministry when you have a degree, rather than doing ministry without the degree. What ended up happening was she went to campus, finished, got a job, and she has never looked back. Not that I condemn her, but I realized that along the line, she began to realize that maybe there are other things that she can get engaged with as she does this thing. Now she seems to be coming back to ministry focused, but now on a more stable platform and a lot more mature than what would have happened at that point in time. So if this is what you feel you're called to do, then one, serve in whatever capacity. Serve in whatever area God has called you to do. Two, find somebody to serve under. Sometimes I feel for me this is what was missed, was when we had some errors early, it ended up pulling us to one extreme and really running away from this whole message of fatherhood and so on. And I feel like if we had somebody who would be able to fill in that gap effectively, that possibly I would have been more effective, or some things would not have had to take so long to unpack. But that didn't happen because I didn't have the authorities at that time to serve under. Serve under somebody, find somebody to serve under. And three, unless a voice comes out of heaven saying, beloved son, I've called you to full-time ministry, please try and find something to do as you're doing your ministry, and God will richly bless you. Thank you.